Excellent. So, hello out there in YouTube land. We're continuing at the Monday Book Club with our reading and discussion of Franz Kafka's uh, major work, The Trial. And today we begin with chapter 4. So, that being said, I will begin the reading. In the next few days, K found it impossible to exchange even a word with Fräulein Brusner. He tried to get hold of her by every means he could think of, but she always managed to elude him. He went straight home from his office and sat on the sofa in his room with the light out and the door open, concentrating his attention on the entrance hall. If the maid, on her way past, shut the door of his apparently empty room, he would get up after a while and open it again. He rose every morning an hour earlier than usual on the chance of catching Fräulein Brusner alone before she went to her work. But none of these stratagems worked or succeeded. Then he wrote a letter to her, sending it both to her office and her home, her house address, in which he once more tried to justify his behavior, offered to make any reparation required, promised never to overstep the bounds that she should prescribe for him, and begged her to, give him an opportunity of merely speaking to her, more especially as he could arrange nothing with Frau Grubach until he had first consulted with her, concluding with the information that next Sunday he would wait in his room all day for some sign that she was prepared either to grant him his request or at least explain why, even though he was pledging his word to defer to her in everything, she would not grant it. His letters were not returned, but neither were they answered. On Sunday, however, he was given a sign whose meaning was sufficiently clear. In the early morning, Kay observed through the keyhole of his door an unusual commotion in the entrance hall, which soon explained itself. A teacher of French. She was a German girl called Montag, a sickly, pale girl with a slight limp, who till now had occupied a room of her own, was apparently moving into Fräulein Brusner's room. For hours she kept on trailing through the entrance hall. She seemed to be always forgetting some article of underwear or a scrap of drapery or a book that necessitated a special journey to carry it into the new apartment. And Mosner.
When Frau Grubach brought in his breakfast, ever since she had angered Kay, she had devoted herself to performing even the most trifling services for him. Kay could not help breaking the silence between them for the first time. "Why is there such a row in the entrance hall today?" he asked as he poured out his coffee. "Couldn't it be put off to some other time? Must the place be spring cleaned on Sunday?" Although Kay did not glance up at Frau Grubach, he could observe that she heaved a sigh of relief. These questions, though stern, she construed as forgiveness or as an approach towards forgiveness. "The place is not being spring cleaned, Herr K," she said. "Fräulein Montag is moving in with Fräulein Wurstner and shifting her things across." She said no more, waiting first to see how Kay would take it and if he would allow her to go on. But Kay kept her on the rack, reflectively stirring his coffee and remaining silent. Then he looked up at her and said, "Have you given up your previous suspicions of Fräulein Brewster?" "Herr Kay," cried Frau Grubach, who had been merely waiting for this question and now stretched out her clasped hands towards him. "You took a casual remark of mine far too seriously. It never entered my head to offend you or anyone else. You have surely known me long enough, Herr Kay, to be certain of that. You have no idea how I have suffered during these last few days. I do speak ill of my boarders, and you, Herr K, believed it and said I should give you notice. Give you notice. The last ejaculation was already stifled in her sobs. She raised her apron to her face and wept aloud. Next.
Go ahead there. I can't find the spot there. I thought we had started somewhere else, but Orly,
Okay.
Orly,
And then
go
will you
ahead.
go after me? It's page 83 in the Everyman's Library edition. Please don't cry, Frau Grubach, said Kay, looking out through the window. He was really thinking of Fraulein Berthner and of the fact that she had taken a strange girl into her room. Please don't cry, he said again, as he turned back to the room and found Frau Grubach still weeping. I didn't mean what I said so terribly seriously either. We misunderstood each other. That can happen occasionally, even between old friends. Frau Grubach took her apron from her eyes to see whether Kay were really appeased. Come now, that's all there was to it, said Kay, and then ventured to add, since to judge from Frau Grubach's expression, her nephew the captain could not have divulged anything. Do you really believe that I would turn against you because of a strange girl? That's just it, Herr Kay, said Frau Grubach. It was her misfortune that as soon as she felt relieved in her mind, she immediately said something tactless. I kept asking myself, why should Herr Kay bother himself so much about Fraulein Berthner? Why should he quarrel with me because of her, though he knows that every cross word from him makes me lose my sleep? And I said nothing about the girl that I hadn't seen with my own eyes. Kay made no reply to this. He should have sent her from the room at the very first word, and he did not want to do that. He contented himself with drinking his coffee and leaving Frau Grubach to feel that her presence was burdensome. Outside, he could hear again the trailing step of Fraulein Montag as she limped from end to end of the entrance hall. Do you hear that? asked Kay, indicating the door. Yes, said Frau Grubach, sighing. I offered to help her and to order the maid to help too, but she's self-willed. She insists on moving everything herself. I'm surprised at Fraulein Berthner. I often regret having Fraulein Montag as a boarder, but now Fraulein Berthner is actually taking her into her own room. You mustn't worry about that, said Kay, crushing with the spoon the sugar left at the bottom of his cup. Does it mean any loss to you? No, said Frau Grubach. In itself, it's quite welcome to me. I'm left with an extra room, and I can put my nephew, the captain, there. I've been bothered in case he might have disturbed you these last few days, for I had to let him occupy the living room next door. He's not very considerate. What an idea, said Kay, getting up. There's no question of that. You really seem to think I'm hypersensitive because I can't stand Fraulein Montag's trailings to and fro. There she goes again, coming back this time. Frau Grubach felt quite helpless. Shall I tell her, Herr Kay, to put off moving the rest of her things until later? If you like, I'll do so at once. Do you want to go now, Tom?
No, keep going. Yeah, keep going.
Me?
No, whoever next. Yeah.
Donna.
Yeah.
Well then, said Kay, she must surely be allowed to shift her things there. Frau Grubach simply nodded. Her dumb helplessness, which outwardly had the look of simple obstinacy, exasperated Kay still more. He began to walk up and down from the window to the door and back again, and by doing that, he hindered Frau Grubach from being able to slip out of the room, which she probably would have done. Kay had just reached the door again when there was a knock. It was the maid, who announced that Fraulein Montag would like a word or two with Herr Kay, and that she accordingly begged him to come to the dining room, where she was waiting for him. Kay listened grimly to the message. Then he turned an almost sarcastic eye on the horrified Frau Grubach. His look seemed to say that he had long foreseen this invitation of Fraulein Montag's, and that it accorded very well with all the persecution he had had to endure that Sunday morning from Frau Grubach's boarders. He sent the maid back with the information that he would come at once, then went to his wardrobe to change his coat, and in answer to Frau Grubach, who was softly lamenting over the behaviour of the importunate Fräulein Montag, had nothing to say but to request her to remove his breakfast tray. "Why, you've scarcely touched anything," said Frau Grubach. "Oh, take it away all the same," cried Kay. It seemed to him as if Fräulein Montag were mixed up with everything. It was too sickening. As he crossed the entrance hall, he glanced at the closed door of Fräulein Bürstner's room. Still, he had not been invited there, but to the dining room, where he flung open the door without knocking. It was a very long, narrow room with one large window. There was only enough space in it to wedge two cupboards at an angle on either side of the door. The rest of the room was completely taken up by the long dining table, which began near the door and reached to the very window, making it almost inaccessible. The table was already laid, and for many people too, since on Sunday almost all the boarders had their midday dinner in the house. Next, please.
Kay entered. Fräulein Montag moved away from the window and came towards him along one side of the table. They greeted each other silently. Then Fräulein Montag, who as always held her head unusually high, said, "I don't know whether you know me." Kay frowned at her. "Of course," he said. "After all, you have been staying with Frau Grubach for a long time. But I rather think you don't take much notice of things in the boarding house." "No," said Kay. "Won't you sit down?" said Fräulein Montag. Without a word, they each pulled out a chair at the far end of the table and sat down opposite one another. But Fräulein Montag immediately stood up again, for she had left her handbag on the windowsill and went to fetch it, shuffling the whole length of the room. When she returned, swinging the handbag gently, she said, "I would just like to say a few words to you on behalf of my friend. She would have come herself, but she feels rather unwell today. She asks you to excuse her and listen to me instead. She would have had no more to say to you than what I shall say. On the contrary, I even think I can say more than she can, because I'm relatively uninvolved, don't you agree?" "What is there to be said, then?" replied Kay, who was growing tired of seeing Fräulein Montag's eyes constantly fixed on his lips. It was an attempt on her part to control what he had to say before he said it. "Fräulein Bürstner is clearly unwilling to speak to me personally, as I asked her to." "That is so," said Fräulein Montag. "Or rather, that is it all. You express yourself and it require consent to talk to someone, not to refuse it. But it can be thought unnecessary to talk to someone, and that is exactly the case here. Now, after your remarks, I can speak frankly. Joe?"
You have asked my friend to communicate with you in writing or verbally. Well, my friend knows what this interview is about, at least I must assume she does, and is, therefore, for reasons unknown to me, convinced that it wouldn't benefit anyone if this conversation actually took place. Furthermore, she told me about it only yesterday and only very briefly. She said that in any case, the conversation couldn't be very important to you because you'd only have had an idea like that by chance, and you'd recognize the futility of the whole enterprise yourself. If not now, then certainly very soon, even without any special explanation. I replied that this might be true, but that I thought that arranging for you to have an explicit answer would help to clear the matter up. I offered to take on this task, and after some hesitation, my friend agreed. I hope, however, that we have now acted in your interests. Even the slightest uncertainty in the most minor matter is always agonizing, and if one can easily avoid it, as in this case, then it is best done immediately. Tom, would you like to take up
No, I'm lost. I might have a slightly
Just-
different translation, but
chapter 5, one whole paragraph before chapter 5 we are, and
what's
in
the,
the last paragraph in chapter 4. But will I read a bit more, Duncan, or do we want to pause? Or
Well, let's get Tom on the page, and then he can decide whether he wants to read it or not. But we do at least get you in the ballpark, Tom.
no, like this is a translation. I left one behind me, and I had to get another one to trial, but it was okay last week. So we finished last week on. He now decided to make better use of all his future Sundays.
Yeah.
And then the next one for me is he's in the bank and he finds the torturers in the next
Oh,
room.
it's a different arrangement.
different?
It's a
Yeah,
different arrangement. Yeah.
yeah.
So-
Okay. On the
Yes.
spot.
No, so just read through tonight and we'll get back
Okay,
online
okay,
next
Yeah,
night.
okay.
Yeah.
because Katrina must read yet anyway.
Katrina
Yeah.
must forget, and there's a big long one to go. So
Yeah, just work away for tonight. Yeah,
Hi,
that's grand.
Katrina.
So, I've kind of lost my place. I mean, I think you said Kay as soon as Miss Montag had finished. Is that okay?
Yes, perfect.
Mhm.
Perfect.
He stood slowly up, looked at her, then across the table, then out the window. The house opposite stood there in the sun and went to the door. Miss Montag followed him a few paces, as she did not quite trust him. At the door, however, both of them had to step back as it opened and Captain Lance entered. This was the first time that Kay had seen him close up. He was a large man of about 40 with a tan, fleshy face. He bowed slightly, intending it also for Kay, and then went over to Miss Montag and deferentially kissed her hand. He was very elegant in the way he moved. The courtesy he showed toward Miss Montag made a striking contrast with the way she had been treated by Kay. Nonetheless, Miss Montag did not seem to be cross with Kay, as it even seemed to him that she wanted to introduce the captain. Kay, however, did not want to be introduced. He would not have been able to show any sort of friendliness either to Miss Montag or to the captain. The kiss on the hand had, for Kay, bound them into a group which would keep him at a distance from Miss Burstner, whilst at the same time seeming to be totally harmless and unselfish. Kay thought, however, that he saw more than that he thought he also saw that Miss Montag had chosen a means of doing it that was good, but two-edged. She exaggerated the importance of the relationship between Kay and Miss Burstner, and above all, she exaggerated the importance of asking to speak with her, and she tried at the same time to make out that Kay was exaggerating everything. Duncan.
She would find that she was deceived. Kay wished to exaggerate nothing. He knew that Fraulein Brewster was an ordinary little typist who could not resist him for long. And coming to this conclusion, he deliberately left out the account that Frau Grubach had told him about Fraulein Brewster. He was thinking all this as he quitted the room with a curt word of leave-taking. He made straight for his own room. But a slight titter from Fraulein Montag, coming from the dining room behind him, put it into his head that perhaps he could provide a surprise for the pair of them, the captain as well as Fraulein Montag. He glanced round and listened to make sure that there was no interruption was likely from any of the adjacent rooms. All was still. Nothing was to be heard but a murmur of voices in the dining room, and the voice of Frau Grubach coming from the passage leading to the kitchen. The opportunity seemed excellent, and Kay went over to Fräulein Brusner's door and knocked softly. When nothing happened, he knocked again, but no answer came. Was she sleeping? Or was she really unwell? Or was she pretending she wasn't there, knowing there could only be Kay who was knocking so softly? Kay assumed that she was pretending and knocked more loudly, and at last, as his knocking had no result, cautiously opened the door, not without a feeling that he was doing something wrong, and even more useless than wrong. There was nobody in the room. Moreover, it had scarcely any resemblance now to the room which Kay had seen. Anne M.
Against the wall, two beds stood next to each other. Three chairs near the door were heaped with dresses and underclothes. A wardrobe was standing open. Fräulein Bürstner had apparently gone out while Fräulein Montage was saying her piece in the dining room. Kay was not very much taken aback. He had hardly expected at this stage to get hold of Fräulein Bürstner so easily. He had made this attempt, indeed, mainly to annoy Fräulein Montague. Yet the shock was all the greater when, as he was shutting the door again, he saw Fräulein Montague and the captain standing talking to each other in the open door of the dining room. They had perhaps been standing there all this time. They scrupulously avoided all appearance of having been observing him. They talked in low voices, following Kay's movements only with the abstracted gaze one has for people passing when one is deep in conversation. All the time, their glances weighed heavily upon Kay, and he made what haste he could to his room, keeping close against the wall. End of chapter 4.
Oh my God.
Well, what do you think is going on?
This guy is nuts.
Hmm?
He's nuts.
He's melting down.
He's not very savvy.
No.
He's too imaginative in a very neurotic way.
Mhm.
And Miss Montag, which is German for Monday, as I understand it, she's
Oh.
not much better.
Yeah, yeah.
No, I've come to talk with you, and yet we agreed that this better if this matter wasn't discussed. So you will come to appreciate this in the future. Goodbye.
Um, yeah, Kay just has an overwrought imagination.
Yeah. Because everyone else is normal. You know, they're chatting away to themselves, Montag
Yeah,
and the
in this scene, everybody else is normal. And he's just, you know, he's almost like a prosecutor in this regard.
Yeah,
You know, where he's made
yeah.
up, he's developed a scenario of a kind of a crime
Hmm.
against him, and he's interpreting everything that happens to him from that lens.
I think you nailed it.
Yeah, which is not to say that he's wrong. He may not be wrong at all. He may be right, but you know, there's no way of knowing. But you know, his behavior is becoming weirder and weirder.
But you know, what would you do if you've been arrested, not knowing what the accusations were or who launched them? I mean, there would be an element of a fright around people,
Yeah,
Yeah.
paranoia.
suspicion, unrest, trying to define things, be reassured that things are okay around you. You don't know who the enemy is.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And I would probably do just like Joseph K. And I would
Yeah.
probably make my situation even worse.
Mhm.
Well, he's got the landlady weeping in his room.
Mm,
Yeah.
It's crazy.
mm.
But she has a vested interest in this too. She doesn't want another boarder leaving.
Oh yeah,
Mm.
yeah. And she also has a loan from the bank via Mr. K. So,
Yeah.
so like she, you really should not get in that sort of involvement with your tenants.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I would assume that she looks at him as her most reliable tenant,
Yeah,
Mhm.
the one that makes the most money,
good
the
stuff.
one that has the very regular habits. I'm sure he pays on time. And up to this point, he's shown all the proper deferences.
Yeah.
And so she wants to keep him as a tenant, if nothing else.
Did he say somewhere earlier that she owed him money?
Oh,
Yeah, but I think that was
Where was he? Who was he talking to then? He was talking to,
the bank, uh, the blurring the distinction between him and
yeah.
he's not the bank, but people say, you talk about
Mhm.
a manager like that. Dunk was I owe Duncan 300 grand, I'm going to pay him, but it's actually his bank where he
Right,
showed.
right.
That's the
How
way
did you know that I was a bank loan officer?
well, sort of, yeah,
One of my past lives.
don't let anyone know, I'll get you that money someday.
Mm.
But is
What did I, well, sorry, can I ask a question? What did I miss out on? What had Frau Grunberg, the landlady, what had she said about Bustner?
she said she was out walking in strange parts of the town with men or something. Wasn't that the
That
I
was
think
it. Thank you. Yeah, I'd
I
forgotten
don't know
that.
what Kay did. I a vague feeling he tried his hand with her or something. It's sort of
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's
yeah. So help me tune
Yeah.
back in. Frau Brusner, yes, she does have an office job, but does she
Mm.
not also have a special nighttime job? Who
I,
who is the waitress that may or may not be dancing in the clubs
oh,
and may or may not be a prostitute?
isn't that Kay's lady friend who's a waitress? He's friendly with a waitress in somewhere. I thought it was a coffee shop. Um, I'm just a bit confused,
Oh,
but
yeah. Emily or some name like that. Me too.
But yeah, but anyway, I mean, even if I've confused the person, it is true that the landlady considers some of Fraulein Brusner's behavior less than savory and
yeah,
made a remark to that regard to Kay. And of course, Kay has a real interest in Fraulein Brusner. He would like a relationship with her.
yeah. Yeah,
So
I
he,
think the extent of her crimes were that she was walking in town unaccompanied or something like that. It,
yes,
it
yes.
was very fragile stuff, and it was not as if she was, if, hey, don't ask me what.
here's another autobiographical thing. The first woman that he was engaged to, her initials are FB.
Mm, yeah.
Mhm.
That's Felice
Yeah,
Bauer.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think he was engaged to her twice.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, li- life
Well,
and life and literature.
I have a friend who did that. He got engaged twice to the same woman, and each time it ended in ferocious bust up.
Oh,
History repeated itself. He was old enough to have sense as well. He was well in his 40s.
we have a funny story. My brother-in-law's let's see, his mother was in line somewhere, and this man came by and said something like, "Oh, you're so lovely, you're so lovely. Why didn't we meet before?" She says, "You old coot, I was married to you for 5 years." Who would think?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but there's really scary something. It's this feeling of not knowing what's frightening me as I read this. It's
Yeah,
just something weird about the whole setup. And you don't know whether to laugh or be frightened.
yeah. It's really menacing.
Yeah, menacing. That's the word.
Well, she's
Yeah.
moving in her nephew, who's a captain,
Yeah,
That's right.
isn't he? So that's going to mean that he can keep an eye on everything, and she can report to him.
Yeah,
Ah,
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He sounds like, his arrival sounds connected with the arrest of Mr. K.
You're thinking maybe an agent?
How they put their agent in to keep an eye on him, and they put the arm on the landlady.
mhm.
You do society a favor, we'll move your captain in pretend he's your cousin, and as this guy could be dangerous, this Joseph K guy. Something, but again, that's just. I'm going like Joseph K myself now. I'm beginning to see threats everywhere for him.
Mm.
Well, I like the I may have the wrong impression of Miss Frau Montag, but my impression is that Frau Montag is basically a mousy little person who is reveling in acting as a representative of Frau Brusner,
Yeah,
and has really fallen into the role of the negotiator
yeah,
to straighten things out. But it's also strange that Fraulein Brewster is not around to help Fraulein Montag move
yeah.
herself into the room.
He's supposed to be sick in bed, and then when he opens the door, there's no one there.
No one's there. Yeah.
Has she been disappeared?
Hmm.
And
Well, I would say that she's, remember the reason that all this has happened is because Joseph K. burst into her room,
yeah,
into Miss Brewster's room, and tried to force an issue. I can't remember what the issue was at the time, but I'm sure he kind of freaked her out.
yeah. But Miss Montag is chatting very cozily with the captain.
Mhm.
May not be.
Mhm.
They may be working for the same branch of the Stasi. You know.
Yeah. Well, is not Fraulein Brewster's room right next to Joseph K.'s?
Yes, yes.
So they could have their cake and eat it too. If there's a liaison between the captain and Fraulein Montag.
That sounds professional, you see. But suddenly,
They-
this very stilted girl is having a cozy chat and throwing glances at the other fella, at Joseph K. And but I'm only noticing it because he noticed it.
Yeah, right. Yes, it does set up suspicions within the reader's mind
Yeah,
if we begin searching the horizon for other clues.
threats and yeah.
Okay, other comments, questions about this chapter 4?
I'm having a Kafkaesque experience with this because this chapter has disappeared from what I feel like Kafka when he was, or Kay when he was walking around that house in the previous chapters. I can't find the door. I can't find the chapter.
Have you found it? Have you found
No,
it?
no.
Not at all.
No,
That's amazing.
You haven't found Miss Montag at all?
no, no.
Have you got the right book there, Tom? Let's see.
I'm like
You
Kay,
might have
yeah.
substituted the Metamorphosis.
I don't know where Miss Montag had gone, but anyway.
A whole new concept in books, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
I bet.
Yeah.
I
Well,
bet.
it was assembled by Brood, by the biographer, and Kafka didn't even want it published. He wanted it
That's right,
destroyed.
yeah.
And there was a lot of stuff that was not included.
Yeah, and he I think Brod selected the chapter in the order of the chapters and that, but I don't know where this guy. It's by Richard Stokes, but yeah, we'll see.
He knew something because Kafka used to have people come and listen to him read the chapters as he had finished them, and that's how Brood
Okay.
thought it should be assembled, but that wasn't definitive as to that would be the way Kafka would have liked the final copy.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, so Tom,
yeah.
just 1 second here. I'm going to put a copy in the chat.
Okay.
Here's.
Do you mind putting up the one that you put in earlier on YouTube, Duncan? I think I might have been too late to pick it up.
Okay, I will.
Thank you.
Do that one again. So Tom, here is it, and it reads like the copy that I have. And if you do a couple of clicks, choose the read now option. And then it'll give you a menu that lists chapters. And we're about ready to begin chapter 5.
How does that begin? What's the name of the chapter 5?
5 begins
Whipper.
by saying it's a few evenings later.
Yeah, I have that. That's fine. I have it.
Fräulein Buster's friend, yeah.
Yeah. A few evenings later, I have that, Duncan, yeah.
Okay, so and then let me see if I can repost this other one
Thank you.
for Anne.
Thank you.
There you go. So Anne, you should.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Okay. I guess we can go on with the next chapter. And let's see, and you read, so that Tom would actually be the one that begins chapter 5.
I'll begin, okay. Yeah. A few evenings later, as Kay was passing through the corridor from his office at the bank to the main staircase, he was on this occasion almost the last to leave. Only 2 bank messengers in the dispatch department were still working in the light thrown by a single lamp. He heard the sound of moaning from behind the door to what he had always assumed was a lumber room, although he'd never seen it himself. He stopped in astonishment and listened again to make sure he had not been mistaken. It was quiet for a while, then the moaning began again. At first he thought of fetching one of the messengers. He might perhaps need a witness. But he was overwhelmed by such uncontrollable curiosity that he practically wrenched the door open. It was, as he had correctly assumed, a lumber room. Useless old printed forms and empty earthenware ink bottles lay in a jumble behind the threshold. But in the room itself stood 3 men, stooping beneath the low ceiling. A candle on a shelf provided them with light. "What's going on here?" Kay blurted out in his excitement, though not loudly. One of the men, who was clearly in charge of the other 2, and the first to draw attention to himself, was wearing a sort of dark leather outfit that left his neck and chest, as well as the whole length of his arms, bare. He did not reply. But the other 2 cried out, "Sir, we are being flogged because you complained about us to the examining magistrate." And only then did Kay realize that it was indeed the warders, Franz and Wilhelm, that the third man held a cane in his hand to flog them. "Hang on," Kay said, staring at them. "I didn't complain. I only reported what had gone on in my lodgings." and your behavior wasn't exactly irreproachable. Next.
Morla, you there?
Oh, sorry. I thought I'm reading away. Sorry, where did you finish?
Sorry, yeah, just I didn't complain. I only reported that what had been gone on in my lodgings, and your behavior wasn't exactly irreproachable. It's about a page.
I have it.
Yeah.
Sir, said Willem, while Franz openly tried to take cover behind him from the third man. If you only knew how badly we are paid, you wouldn't be so hard on us. I have a family to lead, and Franz here wants to get married. A man tries to make whatever he can, and you don't get that rich on hard work, not even if you work day and night. Your fine shirts were a temptation, of course. That kind of thing is forbidden to warders. It was wrong, but it's a tradition that body linen is the warder's prerequisite. Oh, perquisite. It has always been the case, believe me, and it's understandable too. For what importance can such things have for a man who is unlucky enough to be arrested? But if he ventilates it openly, punishment is bound to follow. I had no idea of all this, nor did I ever demand that you should be punished. I was only defending a principle. Franz, Willem turned to the other warder. Didn't I tell you that the gentleman never asked us to be punished? Now you see that he didn't even know we should be punished. Don't be taken in by what they say, remarked the third man to Kay. The punishment is as just as it is inevitable. Don't listen to him, said Willem, interrupting himself to clap his hand, over which he had got a stinging blow with the rod to his mouth. We are only being punished because you accused us. If you hadn't, nothing would have happened, not even if they had discovered what we did. Do you call that justice? Both of us, and especially myself, have a long record of trustworthy service as warders. You must yourself admit that, officially speaking, we guarded you quite well. We had every prospect of advancement and would certainly have been promoted to be whippers pretty soon, like this man here, who simply had the luck never to be complained of, for a complaint of that kind really happens very seldom indeed. Next, please, Donna.
And all is lost now, sir. Our careers are done for. We'll be set to do much more menial work than a warder's. And besides that, we're in for a whipping, and that's horribly painful. Can that Bertrand cause such terrible pain? Asked Kay, studying the switch, which the man waved to and fro in front of him. We'll have to take off all our clothes first, said Willem. Ah, I see, said Kay, and he looked more attentively at the whipper, who was tanned like a sailor and had a brutal, healthy face. Is there no way of getting these two off their whipping? Kay asked him. No, said the man, smilingly shaking his head. Strip, he ordered the warders. And he said to Kay, you mustn't believe all they say. They're so terrified of the whipping that they've already lost what wits they had. For instance, all that this one here, he pointed to Willem, says about his possible career is simply absurd. See how fat he is. The first cuts of the birch will be quite lost in that fat. Excuse me. Do you know what made him so fat? He stuffs himself with breakfasts of all the people he arrests.
Oh,
Didn't he eat up your breakfast too? There, you see, I told you so. But a man with a belly like that couldn't ever become a whipper. It's quite out of the question. There are whippers just like me, maintained Willem, loosing his trouser belt. No, said the whipper, drawing the switch across his back so that he winced. You aren't supposed to be listening. You're to take off your clothes. I'll reward you well if you let them go, said Kay. And without glancing at the whipper again, such things should be done with averted eyes on both sides. He drew out his pocketbook. So, you want to lay a complaint against me too, said the whipper, and get me a whipping as well. No, no. Do be reasonable, said Kay. If I had wanted these two men to be punished, I shouldn't be trying to buy them off now. I could simply leave, shut this door after me, close my eyes and ears and go home. But I don't want to do that. I really want to see them set free. If I'd known that they would be punished, or even that they could be punished, I should never have mentioned their names, for I don't in the least blame them. It is the organization that is to blame, the high officials who are to blame. That's so, cried the warders, and at once got a cut of the switch over their backs, which were bare now. If it was one of the high judges you were flogging, said Kay, and as he spoke he thrust down the rod which the whipper was raising again, I certainly wouldn't try to keep you from laying on with a good will. On the contrary, I would pay you extra to encourage you in the good work. Next, please.
Okay. What you say sounds plausible, said the flogger, but I'm not going to be bribed. I'm employed to do the flogging, so that's what I do. The guard friends, who perhaps hoping that Kay's intervention might work out in their favour, had so far been quite reticent, now went to the door, dressed only in his trousers, knelt down, hanging on Kay's arms, and whispered, "If you can't manage to get a reprieve for both of us, then at least try to get me off. William is older than me, is far less sensitive, and he has had a light flogging before a few years ago. But I have never been disgraced before, and I was only led astray by William, who is my teacher for better or worse. Downstairs outside the bank, my poor fiancé is waiting to see what happened. I'm so miserably ashamed." He dried his face, which was streaming with tears, on Kay's coat. "I'm not waiting any longer," said the flogger. He seized the cane with both hands and lashed out at Franz, while William cowered in a corner and watched furtively without daring to turn his head. Franz uttered a scream that seemed not to be that of a human being, but to come from an ill-treated instrument. It rose in a single unwavering note and filled the whole corridor. It must have been heard through the whole building. "Don't scream," cried Kay, unable to contain himself. On tenterhooks he looked in the direction from which the messenger must surely appear, and bumped into Franz, not violently, but hard enough to knock the dazed man to the ground, where he clawed the floor feverishly with his hands. But he could not escape the blows, and the cane reached him even as he lay on the floor. As he withered under it, the tips swished up and down in regular strokes. So,
It's me again, is it?
Mm-hmm.
And now a clerk appeared in the distance, and a few steps behind him, a second one. Kay had quickly slammed the door quickly behind him and gone over to one of the windows looking out over the courtyard and opened it. The screaming had stopped completely. In order not to let the clerks come too close, he cried, "It's me." "Good evening, sir," came the reply. "Is anything wrong?" "Oh, no," replied Kay. "It's only a dog howling in the yard." When the clerks didn't move, he added, "You can carry on with your work." In order to avoid getting into a conversation with them, he leant out of the window. When he looked back into the corridor after a while, they'd gone. But Kay now stayed at the window. He didn't dare not go into the junk room, and he didn't want to go home either. The courtyard into which he was looking down into was small and square. Around it there were offices. All the windows were now dark. Only the top ones contained a reflection of the moon. Kay tried hard to see into a dark corner in which some hand cards had been stacked. It tormented him that he hadn't managed to prevent the beating. But it wasn't his fault that he hadn't succeeded. If Franz hadn't screamed, certainly he must have hurt a lot, but at a crucial moment one must control oneself. If he hadn't screamed, Kay would at least very probably found another way of talking the flogger out of it. If the whole of the lower level of officials were a corruptible rabble, why would the flogger, who had the most inhumane job, be an exception? Kay had also observed how his eyes had lit up at the sight of the banknote. He'd obviously only carried out the beating, therefore, in order to increase the amount of the bribe a bit. And Kay wouldn't have tried to save money. He really wanted to free the guards, since he'd already begun to fight the corruption of this judicial system. It was self-evident that he should also intervene at this level. But of course, everything was over the moment Franz had begun to scream. Kay wouldn't allow the clerks, and perhaps other people too, to come and walk in on him bargaining with the group in the junk room. No one could expect this sacrifice of Kay. If that was what he'd intended, it would almost have been easier for him to take his own clothes off and offer himself to the flogger as a substitute for the guards.
Oh,
Shame, the flogger certainly would not have agreed to this substitution, because he would have seriously neglected his duty without gaining any advantage, and would probably have been done so twice over, because as long as Kay was involved in court proceedings, court employees were probably forbidden to harm him. However, special provisions could also apply here. In any case, Kay couldn't have done anything other than slam the door, even though it still hadn't eliminated all the risks he faced. Fact was that he'd given Franz a push at the end. The fact that he had given Franz a push at the end was unfortunate and only to be excused by his agitated state. Trina?
In the distance, he heard the steps of the servitors. He did not want them to be too aware of his presence, so he closed the window and walked towards the main staircase. At the door of the junk room, he stopped and listened for a little while. All was silent. The two policemen were entirely at the whipman's mercy. He could have beaten them to death. Kay reached his hand out for the door handle, but drew it back suddenly. He was no longer in any position to help anyone, and the servitors would soon be back. He did, though, promise himself that he would raise the matter again with somebody and see that, as far as it was in his power, those who really were guilty, the high officials whom nobody had so far dared point out to him, received their due punishment. As he went down the main stairway at the front of the bank, he looked carefully around at everyone who was passing, but there was no girl to be seen who might have been waiting for somebody, not even within some distance from the bank. Franz's claim that his bride was waiting for him was shown thus to be a lie, albeit one that was forgivable and intended only to elicit more sympathy. Duncan.
All the next day, Kay could not get the warders out of his head. He was absent-minded, and to catch up on his work had to stay in the office even later than the day before. As he passed the lumber room, again on his way out, he could not resist opening the door. And what confronted him, instead of the darkness he had expected, bewildered him completely. Everything was still the same, exactly as he had found it on opening the door the previous evening. The files of old papers and the ink bottles were still tumbled behind the threshold. The whipper with his rod and the warders with all their clothes on were still standing there. The candle was burning on the shelf, and all the warders immediately began to wail and cry out, "Sir!" At once, Kay slammed the door shut and then beat on it with his fist as if that would shut it more securely. He ran almost weeping to the clerks, who were quietly working in the copying presses and looked at him in surprise. "Clear that lumber room out, can't you?" he shouted. "We're being smothered in dirt." The clerks promised to do so next day. Kay nodded. He could hardly insist on their doing it now, so late in the evening as he originally intended. He sat down for a few minutes for the sake of their company, shuffled through some duplicates, hoping to give the impression that he was inspecting them, and then, seeing that the men would scarcely venture to leave the building along with him, went home, tired, his mind quite blank.
Huh.
This is getting more bizarre
Yeah.
and humorous. I'm amazed at the amount of humor. This is
This guy's nuts. He's imagining it all.
But it's the reader that is humored.
Huh?
It's we as readers are humored rather than anybody in the story is humored.
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I suppose it's catching us by surprise because
Yeah.
like we all I remember with these guys is they ate his breakfast, and it
Yeah.
comes up as a
Yeah.
big deal. We always eat the breakfast, and look at the guy's weight because he's eating breakfast, and what
because
happened?
he's eating all the arrestees' breakfasts.
Yeah, I found myself trying to find situations that I in my own life, that's sort of a, you throw your back mind, don't know, maybe back to Ireland of the 1970s and the heavy gang and all this kind of, they were a branch of the police force. And you can guess that that was their nickname, and try to picture things like that and film you see of newsreel you see of prisons in the Middle East after the government was overthrown and prisoners being let out, and
Yeah.
or indeed Abu Ghraib under
Yeah.
of democracy, freedom, and a good price for your oil,
Right.
and all that sort of stuff, But I find out I'm reaching into my own life to try and put a mental picture, and the next thing, a day later, he opens the door, and the same thing is happening.
The other thing is the fact that it's in the bank, the room is in the bank.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary, yeah. But he does catch, I think, the overall state of tortures. They're
Yeah.
quite casual, and one prisoner or the warder is pleading for leniency, and the torturer is Kate attempts to bribe him, and all this kind of stuff, which goes on, and
Absolutely.
I'm thinking of a line from Auden's poem. I can't think of it, where things go on, ordinary things go on while things are happening. He says something like, "The torturer's horse scratches his behind against a tree while the torturers continue their work."
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think he mentions the Fall of Icarus, that painting by Bruegel, where there's a ploughman in the foreground, and there's only a tiny little thing of Icarus falling into the sea.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And he kind of says it wasn't a great event for the ploughman, it was just something falling into the sea, and there's a ship going by as well, or a boat, and they didn't, they had somewhere else to go. But it gives me that kind of thing where, and it's true in the torture things that we know about in the present day. It goes on while people are doing other things. It's just kind of
Right.
yeah.
Right.
I'm paid to beat, so I beat.
Yeah.
It's and yeah.
I will have to say, though, that I do not think that the humor that I'm perceiving in here is totally me.
Yeah.
I'll be very curious as we go on of whether we're going to find other signs of this very wry, sly sense of humor.
Mm.
And I don't know Kafka enough to know whether that's true or not, but I mean, I was really seeing just the way he phrased this thing. You know what he reminded me, what he's beginning to remind me of? How many people here have read some Kierkegaard?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
To read Kierkegaard is almost an exercise in absurdity all by itself. I don't know about you, Tom, but when I occasionally will read some Kierkegaard,
Yeah.
and my head very soon is kind of spinning around in a giddy sort of way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, he has either or, and, the kind of seducer's diary. And he wrote profusely, and he's kind of, he's regarded, I think, as the first or the father of existentialism. But yeah, he kind of, he has that same kind of thing, kind of a dizziness that you don't kind of expect. He can't grasp what he's at, but he knew what he was about, as Kafka did as well, I think. But yeah, I don't know whether the other guy that I have read is I don't know whether you come across him or not, George Steiner.
Oh, the literary critic?
Yeah, and funnily enough, he has essays on Kierkegaard, and he has essays on Kafka as well. And he actually he compares them. He thinks they're kind of close, and it's strange for you to say that, Duncan. Yeah, yeah.
I say
Yeah.
that simply because,
Yeah.
particularly when we read this last chapter, I
Yeah,
had that same physical sensation that I
yeah,
get when I read Kierkegaard.
yeah,
Kierkegaard is so off the wall, and his way of thinking is so strange that to follow it makes me dizzy and giddy.
yeah,
And I never get very far with Kierkegaard,
yeah.
but I will always, probably a couple of times a year, I will circle back around and read a little bit of
Mm.
Kierkegaard, and it's always the same thing happens to me. So, and this particular chapter, the Whipper, I mean,
Yeah.
some of the stuff it's outrageously funny.
And the flogger is in some of the texts, instead of the whipper, it's and there's all that. It reminds you that this all has been translated. So,
No.
Do you think he's guilt-ridden?
Kafka
Because
or
he
the
didn't, the K is
yeah,
guilt-ridden. So he goes to the door the next day and he imagines it all again because he doesn't intervene. He doesn't pay them off. He
yeah,
doesn't do anything the first day. So he thinks it's
yeah,
going to happen again. So it's happening
possibly,
again.
yeah,
Well, yeah. It is a perfect, in a sense, a perfect description of what happens to a lot of people in, quote, modern society, where we see something which is obviously very wrong,
yeah,
and then we weigh whether we can sensibly do anything about it or not, preferably at very little risk to ourselves.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of times, people just turn and walk away from it.
and then it bothers us for
And then
for a
it
long time.
bothers us, and we go back to the scene hoping that what happened was a hallucination. So if we open the door a second time
Yeah,
and there's nobody in there, we can go, oh, okay, fine. So there was no need for me to intervene. That's taking care of itself.
Interesting.
This is very subtle this is very subtle exploration of the modernish type mind,
Yeah.
looking
And
in
the, I
huge
think I think the
technology.
facts
Hmm?
I think the fact that the chapter is so relatively short gives it very short and very complete to get all that kind of stuff, uh, what it sets off in our minds. Yeah.
Is this then, just going back to what Orla said, is this just a flash of his head? Or is all this in this episode, this 6 pages in his imagination? And he's going back and, is it almost like a dream he's having? I don't know, use the D word, the dream word, but like, are we inside his head? And that's the way what he's describing cannot happen. Like you can't have a torture chamber in a bank, and you can't see the same scene the following day.
No.
Joe, I'm going to argue that yes, you not only can have a torture chamber in a bank, but almost all banks have torture chambers.
Yeah,
They're just not done with flogging. They're done. They're done with.
yeah. But I mean, obviously, the society could be organized so that all police flogging is done in a bank and that. But in the normal course of events, but whereas we're inside his head, and it's not really. We're not really laughing because it's humorous. We're 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 laughing because we're uncomfortable. It's a nervous laugh.
Mm.
And I mean, don't find the idea of guys being hit with canes one bit funny. So I kind of laugh nervously, and maybe I'm just like we're used to Joyce to thinking about whose head are we inside, and that's why I'm just asking that question of myself here.
Mhm.
How much, and have we been in his head all along? Awaken.
But the thing is that doesn't seem to be any due process. That's and maybe that's just another re-emphasizing the lack of legal protection for people in Kafka's
Yeah,
world.
yeah, and
then to mete out prison punishment in a room in a bank.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I just want to check there, the next chapter in the reading. What is it? Uncle Lenny. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah.
Uncle Lenny. Okay, he's Uncle Lenny.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
I think though that actually Kafka, obviously the particulars are different, but Kafka is doing a marvelous job of elucidating all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Like that, even within the abuse of the guards,
Yeah.
there are rules that the guards would, they say we're allowed this, we're allowed to take the shirts, and then
normally we can take the shirts and there's no problem at all, and we're only in trouble because you complained about it. Come on, help us out of this. We're just regular guys.
Would be in trouble if he doesn't do his job. He'd be in trouble. And at the same time, he just pretending to be honest to get the bigger bribe. And he's run many possibilities, but there are kind of rules, and we're hearing this at the moment between, when some outrage comes on today's outrage comes up, and people are trying to remind you of yesterday, and as soon as you say, but yesterday, you get the what about this, what about that, what aboutery, the whatabouteries.
Right.
The whataboutery is in there. And the wonderful, if the guys at this lower level are this corrupt, what would the guys at the top must be like? Kafka K is trying to reason it to himself. And
see if I can. Yeah. Let me see if I can suitably.
So was Kafka aware of Kierkegaard?
Kafka, yeah, he could have been. Kierkegaard
Was a little earlier, right?
was earlier. I think he died about 1860s.
Oh, I didn't realize.
1855.
1855.
Kierkegaard died? It's
Yeah,
18. Oh, wow. I didn't realize
yeah.
it was that early.
I think he was born about 1812. And so Kafka was born in what, 1883.
Yeah.
So he would have, yeah, he could have been.
It's just like in Finnegan's Wake, Joyce brings up Kierkegaard.
He does, yeah.
Mentions
Yeah.
him a few times.
Yeah,
And we're reading this in a sense because of our interest in Joyce.
yeah.
And the other way you have to look at it from, because I didn't know that he invented or elaborated a host of philosophical, psychological, literary, and theological categories, including anxiety, despair, melancholy, repetition, inwardness, and irony.
Uh,
Oh, Kafka is, I mean, not Kafka. Well, Kafka is amazing too. Kierkegaard is amazing. He's just so bizarre to read.
Yeah.
And he was like Kafka, he was a very strange fellow. I mean, he was a seriously strange fellow. And well, of course, Kafka in the end actually had apparently a serious and deeply fulfilling relationship in his last years
Yeah, as a very young woman.
with a very young woman who apparently they got along great. I think he was 36 and she was like 18.
Mhm.
But for whatever reason, they got along just fabulously. And I don't think Kierkegaard was engaged and he broke it off. And he apparently spent most of his time staying awake all night writing, and then during much of the day when he was awake, just walking around. He just walked around the town. But anyway, it'll be very interesting to see where this goes. And it was. I'm particularly interested in the subject of humor and Kafka.
Mm.
What if this is an anxiety provoking book, blah blah blah. But what if there's a lot of really deep humor in it as well? I don't know. Okay.
Okay.
Last minute things there. Anybody need to say something before I say goodbye?
Thank you.
Nope. Thank you.
Thanks, Duncan.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Enjoy sailing tomorrow.
Yeah.
All righty. Actually, it's going to be a motorboat, so.
Okay.
But other than that, it will be water, and we will be moving across the water.